but there's a possibility that people may actually start getting interested in the real solutions to the problems and not so much the gladiatorial spectacle.
Now, I know that you're a Christian. Your faith has been very important to you. You've spoken openly about that on the campaign trail. I want to ask you about a piece that appeared in National Review by David French, in which he wrote the following. He was addressing you, and he was addressing Governor Kasich. And what he wrote was, being a Christian candidate for president means far more than advocacy for life, religious liberty, and the family. It means being humble and self-aware enough to know when your vanity is hurting the country. It's time to deny self, admit defeat, and leave the race. He and so many other Republicans, while they like you, they have concerns that you're a spoiler, in effect, at this point, and that a vote from you is effectively what he said was a vote to destroy the Republican Party. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are that the political establishment, the pundits, like to think that they're in control. And it's really we, the people, who should be in control. And I believe there's still a possibility that we can sort of break the spell that they have over the people. You know, bear in mind that, you know, it's sort of like, you know, why do I stay here? It's like losing a child. If you've ever known somebody who's lost a child, it's a horrendous thing. You would do anything to keep it from happening. I feel like we're in the process of losing our country. And it's in critical condition right now. And I don't see anybody else who really is going to do anything about it. One of the real reasons that we're in critical condition is because we've had so many people who are controlled. You know, they either are on the puppet end of the string or on the puppet master end of the string. And as a result of that, things that are done are not necessarily the things that are the most beneficial things for we the people. And that's one of the reasons that I totally refuse to accept money from special interests and billionaires who want to control things. They are the problem. And anybody who is associated with them is going to continue to do their bidding. And we're going to continue to go down the same road, and we just can't afford that.
I want to ask you about a controversial comment that you made yesterday about President Obama, suggesting that he was, quote, raised white, in contrast to yourself. In response to which many people came out, some well-known African-American commentators suggested that that plays into a narrative that there is some sort of correct or legitimate way of doing blackness, of being black. Your response?
My response is that that's hogwash. You know, basically, in the conversation, and the transcript is available, I said that his experience in growing up is vastly different than most African Americans. And I don't know who could really argue with that. You know, he was raised by his white grandparents in Hawaii in a very affluent area in a private school.
But he looks black. I mean,
well, let me finish. And formative years were spent in Indonesia.
4 years of his young life.
Right. From 10 to 14. Those are formative years with his white mother. Now, for anybody to tell me that that's a typical black experience, you know, it's basically the media doing what they always do. You know, they take a simple statement that I made and they say, so therefore he's saying that, you know, it's bad to be raised white, so that's a racist statement, and he's saying that there's some other racism against blacks, and, you know, on and on they go with their, you know, just ridiculous analysis, which is only for one purpose, and that's to try to ridicule me and to drive wedges. They do it all the time. People ought to be used to it by now.
Let's move on to the voters who have good questions for you. And our first one comes from Landon Este. He's a young Republican worried about whether there is place for a young voter under the GOP tendency. Landon, take it away.
Dr. Carson, many Republicans under 40 are fiscally conservative, but tend to lean more socially libertarian as compared to the older, over 40 crowd. Is there room in the GOP for this younger than 40 crowd when there is such a strong contrast on social issues?
There should be room for them because, one of the reasons that I've joined this race is because as a pediatric neurosurgeon, I was very concerned about the next generation, about their welfare. Now, we look at how our fiscal policies are affecting young people, the millennials, and the next generation. We're talking $19 trillion. Thomas Jefferson said it is immoral to pass debt to the next generation. If you tried to pay off $19 trillion at $10 million a day, 365 days a year, it would take you over 5,000 years. So we're not just talking about the next generation, we're talking about generations as far as the eye can see. And that's the good news, because in fact, the fiscal gap, which is all the unfunded liabilities, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all the governmental programs, agencies, versus the money we have coming in from taxes and other revenue sources. They should be even if we're fiscally responsible for not to. The gap, bring it forward to today's dollars, it's the fiscal gap, it's over $200 trillion. So if somebody came today and said, America, I've got a gift for you. I'm going to give you $19 trillion so you can pay off your national debt. Everybody would be dancing in the streets. We wouldn't even be close to being out of trouble. And that's what young people need to understand. So when people like Bernie Sanders come along and say free college for everybody, we need to understand what he's talking about. This is just going to accelerate our fall off the cliff. And so young people need to recognize that, at least in my case, we're looking at people who are going to be looking for ways to ameliorate that financial deterioration.
Next question is on an important issue. We get so many of our viewers writing in about this issue and asking us to ask you, the candidates, about the VA. It has been nearly 2 years since the scandal over wait times, to put it mildly, erupted at the Veterans Administration. And while the department's chief watchdog has yet to release the findings of the investigations into some 73 VA facilities across the U.S., this issue is shaping up to be a big one in 2016, which leads us to our next voter, Melody Briggs. Melody, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Carson. And as Megan introduced, we do want to hear about the VA. I'd like to hear your solution, your action plan for what you plan to do to improve the VA.
Okay, well, I've had an opportunity to work in a number of VAs, and wonderful patients, wonderful staff, and a mountain of bureaucracy in between them. It was a ridiculous situation. One of the things that first, and let me just put a couple of things in perspective. First of all, our veterans are incredibly important to our freedom. We've been in some kind of conflict on an average every 15 or 20 years. So, and we're only talking about 1% of the population. We have every obligation to take care of them as they've taken care of us. Now, what I would do is when a person enlists in the military, I would attach them with an external support group who would be with them throughout their entire military career, particularly when they're in combat, and for 3 to 5 years afterwards, because that's when PTSD shows up. A year before they're scheduled to be discharged, that group would start working on their integration back into society. So they would quit the military on Friday and start their new job on Monday. They would also have health empowerment accounts that are subsidized, which allow them to go to any healthcare facility in the country, and we'd be delighted to take care of them. And then they could go to a VA facility if they wanted to, but they wouldn't be obligated to do so. That creates competition. Competition is the only thing that will, improve the situation. It works in all parts of our society. And if the VA has to compete for those patients, they will improve, no question about it.
Our next questioner is R.W. Bray. R.W. Bray is the Director of African American Engagement for the Texas GOP. R.W.?
How you doing, Doc? Good to see you here.
You too.
Considering the importance of the African American vote, here late we've seen Democrat candidates posturing their campaigns toward the black community in order to win their candidacy. when it comes to the Republican Party, two contentions that a lot of blacks are concerned about is, number one, likability, second, relatability. Likability being the character of the president, relatability meaning they're relating to the issues of the community. So my question is, what is your campaign doing in order to secure and win the African American vote, but not only that, but secure and win it for the Republican Party?
Okay, well, I don't change my message just because I'm in front of one group versus another group. You know, but by the same token, I believe the right kinds of policies lift all the votes. You know, the policies that our government has had has been extremely detrimental, particularly in the African American community, in terms of destroying families. And, you know, our faith and our families, those are the two strong pillars, particularly in the African American community, that got us through slavery and Jim Crow and segregation and racism. And as those things are broken down, it's problematic. So Republicans, and particularly me, are very, very interested in finding ways to heal those families, put those families back together. And you think about something like out-of-wedlock birth. 73% of African-American babies born out of wedlock. Well, usually that means the end of education for that woman. And it means that baby is 4 times as likely to grow up in poverty. That's very problematic. What we should be doing, I think, is supporting and creating groups that support that woman through that pregnancy so that she's not going off to get an abortion, and then helping her to be able to get her GED or her associate's degree or a bachelor's degree or a master's degree by providing adequate child care so that she can learn to take care of herself and her child so you can break the cycle of poverty. That's the only way it will ever be broken. I think also, you know, one of the things that I've proposed in my tax plan, and please go to bencarson.com and read about it, I got a lot of policy. I said we would have a 6-month hiatus on the corporate tax rate, 0 taxes, so we could bring back the money, repatriate the money overseas, over $2.1 trillion. The only stipulation being that 10% has to be used in enterprise zones and to create jobs for people who are unemployed, underemployed, or on welfare. You want to talk about a stimulus. That would be the biggest stimulus since FDR's New Deal, and it wouldn't cost the taxpayers 1 penny. Those are the kinds of things that we have to do. And also, that once again gets corporate America used to the idea of investing in the people around them. Because whose job is it to take care of the indigent in our society? It is our job. It is we the people. It is not the job of the government. Government does a terrible job of it. You know, Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty. How'd that work out? You know, $19 trillion later, 10 times more people on food stamps, more people on welfare, broken homes, crime, incarceration, out of wedlock birth. Everything is much worse than it was before. And the government needs to read the Constitution. I think that's the problem.
Well, we'll let them do that during the commercial break because we have more we want to get to with Dr. Carson right after this quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. Live in Houston, Texas. Stay with us. And welcome back, everybody. More now with Dr. Ben Carson. Now, one of the most frequent criticisms that we hear about you, Dr. Carson, is that you and your admittedly astonishing skills as a pediatric neurosurgeon, maybe they don't necessarily translate to being commander-in-chief to areas like foreign policy or terrorism. You've heard that before. And Greg Paroli, who says he is likely deciding on you as a candidate, has a question for you along those lines. Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you for coming out tonight, Dr. Carson. How do you respond to these claims that your foreign policy views are weak?
Well, I would respond to that by saying last week when I was in South Carolina, I did a 1-hour foreign policy town hall. And, you know, there were a lot of press there. and I think only one of them wrote a story. And their story was how astonished they were at my foreign policy knowledge. The other ones didn't write anything because they couldn't find anything bad to say. And I just say, to any reporter who asks me that, I say, ask me a foreign policy question and find out what I know about it. I know a lot more about it, I think, probably than a lot of people who are very good at giving canned 60-second answers. I can go into great depth about Islam, where it came from,
I got one.
what jihadism is. Okay.
What's the difference between Shia and Sunni?
Well, there are two different branches of Islam. One is much more fundamental, and one is much more secular. The Sunnis are much more fundamental. The Shia are much more secular. And it is a relevant question because the deal that we made with Iran, which is mainly Sunni, stabbed a lot, which is mostly Shia, stabbed a lot of our Sunni friends in the back throughout the Arabian Peninsula. And then we have the nerve to come to them and say, you be our boots on the ground and we'll be the air power. It makes absolutely no sense. These are the kinds of foolish things that happen when I don't think you fully understand what's going on.
You feel like you're up to the job now, because that was something that you had said a while back, that you were studying up, you were reading.
That was a couple of years ago. Let me put it this way, I'm ready for the quiz now. But also, do bear in mind that I think it's very important to put the right people around you, because no matter how much I've learned, I will never be the world expert on Russian affairs. But I can get access to those kinds of people. But you do have to have a basic fund of knowledge in order to know who you need to get. And Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, said, in a multitude of counselors is safety. And if the wisest man thought that, I certainly believe it too.
Well, this next question touches on one of the most controversial debates in the country, and that's whether or not Syrian refugees should be allowed into the United States. Michaela de Villiers has this question. Michaela?
Good evening, Dr. Carson. My question for you tonight is, should religious tests be used as factors of risk for those who enter our great country?
No, I would never use a religious test, but I would use common sense, and that's something that we sometimes don't do. Some of the questions they ask people coming in, are you a terrorist? Have you ever been associated with terrorists? And do you plan to do it? Give me a break, this is ridiculous stuff. But obviously, we should tighten up our questioning and our screening process, because it's absolutely essential that we don't let the wrong people in this country. And most of the Syrian refugees, they don't want to come here. I've been over there. I've talked to them. They want to be resettled in their own country. And it would be so easy to do that. In the northeast section of Syria, Al-Saqqa province, and that area is controlled by Sunnis and Christians and Kurds. We would have to put an international protective force. It would be much easier than trying to transport them to another location. And the fact that Canada is bringing tens of thousands of them over here, of course they're going to be infiltrated with terrorists and with jihadists. I say it would be jihadist malpractice not to put people in them. I mean, of course, you get this vehicle and it's coming over. Are you kidding me?
Did you just say jihadist malpractice? That's a first. All right, let's get to our next questioner, who is William Green. And he says he's never been and will never be a member of any political party. His focus is on one thing, the U.S. Constitution. William, go ahead.
Amen.
Dr. Carson, besides voting, protesting, or urging our representatives to take action, short of another revolution, what can we, the people, do to help restore our Constitution?
Now, you're going to be surprised at what I'm going to tell you. You can stop listening to the pundits and you can think for yourself. And you can begin by looking at the candidates who are running for president, and you can find out what they believe. You can read their position papers, those who have them, such as myself, and you can dissect them, and you can see how consistent they are with the Constitution. We're not going to have to go through a revolution if we choose somebody who is a member of we the people. The problem is we've been taking people who are members of they, the politicians, who are controlled by the political class, and they continue to manipulate us. And that's the reason that I'm still here. I feel deep in my heart that what Thomas Jefferson said was true. He said the people of America would become less vigilant. They would not be paying attention, and as a result, the government would grow. It will metastasize, it will infiltrate, and it would dominate. But he said just before we turned into another form of government, the people of America would awaken, would recognize they were being manipulated, would rise up, and would retake control. I believe now is the time to do that.
I want to get one more in. We got a little time left. Some of the voters here tonight hail from a variety of college campuses, places where conservative ideals are welcomed and promote. No, they are not. But Sarah Douglas is a student, thank you for getting it, at UT Austin. She says the situation at her school is no different. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Carson. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I was wondering how specifically you would explain to college students how conservative economic policies would be much better for the future than policies that are very liberal, like Bernie Sanders.
I would help them to understand what socialism really is. I think many young people today think that socialism is being concerned about social issues. And of course, that's not what it is. It's a utopian dream where the government takes care of you from cradle to grave. You never have anything to worry about. That's the goal. That's the ideal. They all end up looking exactly the same, with a small group of elites at the top who control everything, a rapidly diminishing middle class, and a vastly expanded dependent class. So I would begin to demonstrate that to them. I would also show them the United States of America, which declared its independence in 1776 and less than 100 years later was the #1 economic power in the world by creating an environment that encouraged entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment. And I would explain to them what happens with regulations, that each regulation costs money. In terms of goods and services, it's passed on to the consumer. It's the most regressive form of taxation that there is,
All right.
and it keeps business from growing.
I got to wrap you because we're up against a hard break. But speaking of taxes and regulations, before I let you go, I've got to ask you, Mitt Romney thinks all the GOP candidates should release their taxes. He says he won't endorse anybody until they've done so. Will you release yours? When and
I'd be
how
happy
many
to.
years?
I have nothing to hide. I've released them for however many years will satisfy people. You got nothing to hide, not a problem. The one thing I can guarantee people about me, there are no scandals. There are no scandals.
Great to see you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And thank you all for watching our special 2-hour Kelly File face-to-face with the GOP candidates here in Houston, Texas.